My name is Murthy Muthuswamy. I am a physicist and author of the new book, Defeating Political Islam, The New Cold War. This is fourth of the lecture in this series, and it is titled Discrediting Jihad and Sharia as a Grand War Strategy. Let me start with a brief review of America's war on terror. At this time, America-hating jihadists are still being produced in large numbers. Overseas American military deployment, notably in Iraq and Afghanistan, have not gone well. In near future, we are facing the prospect of a nuclear 9/11. There is a limit to spending American treasure and blood and valor of young American soldiers. In every year, approximately $200 to $300 billion are being spent in battling radical Islam. Since 2001, the added total of expenditure in the war on terror probably comes between $1 to $1.5 trillion. These are extraordinary expenses even for a well-endowed America, that is, especially when the budget deficits are already running $500 billion to $1 trillion every year. All of this compels us to ask the following question. Could our approach to the so-called war on terror be fundamentally flawed? Let me explain the parameters of America's present long-term strategy toward weakening the radical Islamic threat. This is based upon the premise that in certain Muslim nations with strong Islamic radicalism, by deploying troops and or by giving financial assistance massively and by help building institutions and also help moderate Muslims tackle radicals, the hope is that somehow the radical threat will be minimized. Clearly, this strategy is not working. This may be because this particular approach may not have been well thought out to start with. In my first lecture, in which I compared the contrasting evolution of Pakistan and India, I arrived at an important conclusion. The conclusion being that the prominent features of Islam, namely Sharia and Jihad, are overcoming development, opportunities, and modernism. In that lecture, I also discussed how even second generation and third generation Muslims of Pakistani origin in developed Britain too have been driven to backwardness and radicalism. Again, this was attributed to features of Islam, namely Sharia and Jihad. Let me put it this way. For development or even democracy to succeed and for radicalism to weaken, with or without American deployments, the influence of Sharia and Jihad must first be weakened in Muslim communities in Pakistan and elsewhere. This brings up the following question. Are there any alternate strategies in terms of dealing with radical Islamic threat? To set the stage, let me define a concept called Grand War Strategy. This strategy involves prioritizing theaters of war operations, and then come up with a plan and resources to win a war. During the Second World War, Britain and America both had a grand strategy, which was to defeat the most powerful adversary of the time, the Nazi Germany, and then deal with Japan later. This strategy worked out fine. During the Cold War with the Soviet Union, initially, America found itself deploying its troops in Vietnam to stop the communist takeover of that nation, but unfortunately did not succeed, even at a great cost. This led to consolidating a new strategy called Cold War containment of the Soviet Union. This strategy involved building military, economic, political, and diplomatic alliances with nations around the world to stop the expansion of Soviet-based communism. Clearly, this strategy did not involve appeasing Soviet Union or militarily repulsing it. Indeed, militarily confronting Soviet Union would not have been a wise choice because Soviet Union not only had a very powerful conventional military force, but it also had roughly about 10,000 or so nuclear warheads. Also incorporated in this containment strategy is an ideological warfare in which the United States and its allies discredited the non-performing Soviet communist ideology and contrasted it with successful Western capitalism and the ideas of liberty. Eventually, this message got through to the people under the Soviet control, and the system, the Soviet communist system, that is, collapsed from within. Let me explain to you why a similar containment strategy may work against our main adversaries in the war on terror. Our main adversaries in this new war are political Islamic movements, mostly based in Saudi Arabia, Pakistan, and Iran. Like Vietnam, we and our allies are fighting the proxies of this axis until now. The proxies being Al-Qaeda, Hezbollah, and of course the Taliban, with very limited results and no end in sight. Appeasement of Pakistan and Saudi Arabia has not worked because from these two nations, financial support continued to flow to jihadist groups all over the world, determined to attack us and have attacked us. Significant economic decline of many of these Axis nations is not possible due to the revenues from oil sales these nations acquire by selling oils, of course, to both Eastern and Western nations. Also, the possibility of militarily repelling and to defeat these nations may not be a wise idea because the de facto power in these nations are widespread and semi-autonomous jihadist or radical Islamic movements, and hence removing the central governments from power does little to mitigate the overall threat these nations pose to Western world, Israel, and to US. The key to unlocking the terror puzzle, indeed, may lie in realizing that, as was with Soviet Union, this war is predominantly a war of ideas.